There are a lot of methods present in browser's document to manipulate the content of the DOM. But here, what I've done is I have created a list of 8 methods that we are going to use most of the time. Those methods include creating element, adding element to the DOM, removing element, adding classes and attributes, etc. We'll go one by one to each of these elements to know them. So let's start with the first set of 3. getAttribute, setAttribute and hasAttribute. So this is the HTML of the page. We'll go ahead, select one of the element, that is div of class info. To select that, we'll use query selector and store that in a variable called div. First property is setAttribute. setAttribute is used to add some new attribute to any of the element. Like in our div, what if we want to add a new attribute that is ID? So we can go ahead and say div.setAttribute. setAttribute takes 2 parameters. The first one is the name of the attribute and the second one is the value of the attribute. So here we can see there is only class info, but now there is an ID with the value of test. I have created some CSS classes like list, image border and heading. We will be using that for adding some properties. Say, what if I want to add new attribute to h1 class? So let's select the element and we can set attribute of class with heading. When we do that, we can see the style of the page has changed. Let's go on to the next method, that is getAttribute. getAttribute helps us in getting the value of any attribute. I want to see the value of class attribute. So I can see the value of class attribute is heading. Similarly, we have div. Div has 2 attributes, class and ID. We can go ahead and say div.getAttribute and I want to get class. So we can see info. Similarly, if we do ID, we'll see test. So using the getAttribute method, we can get the value of any HTML elements attribute like class or ID. Let's move on to the next method, that is hasAttribute. So hasAttribute is used for testing whether that exists on that element or not. I want to see whether class attribute exists on h1 or not and the return is true. Similarly, what if I check, does ID exist on h1? Not at all, but let's see. So it returns us false. It means it doesn't exist. So let's move on to the next set of elements where we will learn to create new elements and append it to DOM. So let's learn about the first one called createElement. What if I want to add a new list here? So to do that, we'll have to create a li element. So we'll go ahead and say document.createElement. createElement method takes the name of the element, that is li, and creates that element for us. So we can see it has created that element. It looks like it is an HTML, but as we have already talked about it, like every HTML in DOM is an object. So if we go ahead and say type of, it will give us object. So when we do this, we get this element. But this element doesn't have any property that will be visible here. To add values to li, we need to store it somewhere. So I'll go ahead and store it in a variable called li. Now in li, we can add properties like inner text. And the value is query selector. So if we compare from here to here, we can see by doing this, we are adding some extra information to li. Similarly, we can go ahead and say li.className list. Now if we check li, we'll see li has an inner text of query selector and a class of list. What if I want to append this right here, just after BOM? To do that, we need to select the parent element. So for selecting UL, we'll do document.querySelector UL and store it in a variable UL. So now we have UL. To append our li that we created here into our DOM, we will use a new method called append. So we'll say parent, that is UL. Go ahead and append an element that I'm passing. So the element I'm passing is li. When we press enter, we'll see just after BOM, you can see new list called query selector, and we have a class of list that styles that. So not only that, say for example, we need to add multiple elements. So we can go ahead and create multiple elements. We'll create li2 and li3. In li2, we'll add query selector all as inner text. And li3 will add createElement. And now, if we look at li2 and li3, we can see one has query selector all and other has createElement. We'll push this into DOM by using the method append. So here, append needs the parent element, that is ul.append, and here we can pass two elements, that is li2, li3. So now we'll see query selector all and createElement got added here. There is another very similar method called prepend. So prepend, what it does, like append adds in the last, but prepend will add in the start. So let's just test it. We'll say ul.prepend li2. So if we do that, we'll see it got added in the start. So here we can see just before the h2 element, it got added right here because we said ul prepend the element that I'm passing, that is li2, on top. Prepend adds the element as the first child element and append adds it as the last child element. So that is the difference between them. Let's go ahead and see the next method, that is remove. So with name we can understand that remove will be used for removing some element. Say what if I want to remove this element? So we'll say document.querySelector, this is the first li, and we'll store it in variable called rm. Now what we can do is, like, we can just go ahead and say rm.remove. That's all. As soon as you do that, you'll see it is gone. Similarly, if we do that again, now if we do query selector again, it will select the first li now. Which one is the first li? Platform is the first li now. So if we do this and say rm.remove, what will happen is that element is gone. If we keep doing that, it will keep removing the first li element, and we can see it is removing the element. Let's talk about the last method, that is classList. So what if you want to add class? One way to add class to any element was using setAttribute. There's another way also, like we can go ahead and say h1. We have this class. If we want to add a new class to it, we can just go ahead and say h1 dot class name is equal to heading2. And what will happen now if we check h1 is, like, the heading is gone now because we replace that value with heading2. So these are some of the limitations when it comes to using class property. We'll learn a whole new way of adding classes to any element, and that is called classList. So we can go ahead and say classList, and classList has bunch of methods like add. Heading, what will happen is the heading class will get added. Let's see the element. And here we can see we have heading2 and heading. So it's not like when we are adding a new class, it is removing the older one. So that is one of the benefit. Like, what if now I want to remove heading2 because it's of no use? So for that, there is another method, classList.remove. Which class do you want to remove? So heading2. And when we press enter, we can see now h1 doesn't include that class now. The only class of h1 right now is heading. Now if we do that again, like, what if we want to remove heading? So we'll say heading and it will remove that class from h1. Now it will also remove heading class from h1. There are some situations in which you want to add only if that class doesn't exist, and you want to remove if the class exists, also known as toggle. Say right now in h1 there is no class. It's just the property of class is there, but the value is empty. What if I want to add heading? So I'll just go ahead and say h1.classList.add heading, and it will add the class. What if I go ahead and say h1.classList.toggle, and in toggle we'll pass heading. And what we'll see is, like, if the class exists, it will remove. But now if we do that again, because now class doesn't exist, so what it will do, it will add. So it will remove when it exists, it will add when it doesn't exist. So we learned about three methods like toggle, add, and remove in classList to play around with adding, removing, and toggling classes on any element. These are some of the methods that can help us manipulate the DOM in much more effective ways.